How far can we trace English back? Really far. Not just through Middle English and Old English, but way back, thousands of years. Allow me to introduce you to English's oldest ancestor. Welcome to another Rob Words. This is the English language's family tree, and as we trace it back, we essentially go further back in time. English sprung out of the West Germanic languages, the same as modern Dutch and German. But the West Germanic languages share a common ancestor with all the other Germanic languages, like the Scandinavian languages and Gothic, which is extinct now. An ancestor that gets called Proto-Germanic, a language that was theoretically spoken by a single group of people who would eventually go on to become the Swedes, the Germans, the Dutch, the English, and more. But can we go even further back than that? Yes, we can, because linguists believe that an even older language is not only the shared ancestral language of us English speakers and all of the Germanic peoples, but also speakers of the Romance languages, the Celtic languages, the Slavic languages, the Baltic languages, of Albanian, of Armenian, and of Greek, an ancestor shared not just by almost all of the European languages, but also of Asian languages like Hindi and Pashto and Kurdish and Farsi and Bengali. Just look at this map. Languages that developed as far west as in Iceland and as far east as in India are thought to share a single common ancestor. And that ancestor is known as Proto-Indo-European. Humanity first caught the scent that would lead us to Proto-Indo-European as much as 2 millennia ago. In the 1st century BC, a Greek scholar called Dionysius of Halicarnassus suggested that Latin might actually be a mixture of Greek and other languages. He was actually trying to prove that the Romans were in fact Greeks, which was nonsense, but he was right that the two languages were more closely related than had been previously thought. However, it took us many centuries more to eventually start joining up the rest of the dots and to see that the links weren't limited to just southern Europe either. One of the leading figures in this was a fellow called Sir William Jones, a Brit living in India who'd studied Latin and Greek and now found himself taking an interest in Sanskrit, a language that holds a similar historic and prestige position in South Asia to Latin in Europe. He not only adored Sanskrit, but also felt he'd picked up on something that should have been obvious. In 1785, he wrote, "The Sanskrit language, whatever be its antiquity, is of a wonderful structure, more perfect than the Greek, more copious than the Latin, and more exquisitely refined than either, yet bearing to both of them a stronger affinity, both in the roots of verbs and in the forms of grammar, than could possibly have been produced by accident." Intriguing. Go on. So strong indeed that no philologer could examine them all three without believing them to have sprung from some common source which perhaps no longer exists. There it is. He's doing it. He's describing Proto-Indo-European. And he went a little further too, saying there is a similar reason, though not quite so forcible, for supposing that both the Celtic, though blended with a very different idiom, had the same origin with the Sanskrit, and the Old Persian might be added to the same family. Weird use of the there. Anyway, Sir William wasn't the only linguist to make an observation along these lines, and he certainly wasn't the first to link Sanskrit with Old Persian. But from then on, this idea of a common ancestor linking languages across 2 continents is established, with the Germanic languages also included, and therefore English. This great-grandmother tongue was given a handful of different names. Some scholars called it Japhetic, a biblical reference to one of Noah's 3 sons who's supposed to have fathered the 3 divisions of humanity. Others called it Aryan, but that term fell out of favour sometime around the 1940s. It is hard to imagine why. It does, however, still get used, by the way, to describe a smaller family of languages safely far away from Germany. The new linguistic superfamily was also termed Indo-Germanic in early descriptions, a name that describes the wide geographical spread from as far south and east as India and as far north and west as northern Europe. And indeed, it's still called Indo-Germanic in German. It's Indo-Germanisch. But linguists writing in English, at least, eventually settled on describing it as Indo-European, and the original language as Proto-Indo-European. Proto is a Latin prefix meaning earliest or original. So how similar are all the many languages that come under that massive Indo-European umbrella? Are they similar enough that, say, an English speaker way over in Western Europe could understand Sanskrit from over in India? Probably not, right? Well, you'd be surprised. Let's take those two examples and throw in Latin for the sake of further comparison. Now, these are the numbers 1 to 10 in those three languages, and though the similarities aren't always obvious, they are very much there. Just look at 2, for example. 2, duo, and dve. They are so similar, particularly when you bear in mind that t and d are produced in a very similar way in the mouth. You just wiggle your vocal cords to turn a t into a d. Try it. T, d, t, d. See? Check out 3 as well. 3, tres, and trini. There is clearly a pattern there. I honestly think an English speaker could hear the words ekam, dve, trini and recognize that the other person is counting to 3. And they're doing so in Sanskrit. Look at sexy 6, 2, and 9, nowem, nava. It's amazing, right? And these similarities simply don't exist between Indo-European languages and non-Indo-European languages, even when they're on each other's doorsteps. Finnish is not an Indo-European language, despite being surrounded by them, and its numbers 1 to 10 bear no resemblance whatsoever to those that are. And it's in universal concepts like numbers that these similarities between the languages really shine through. Perhaps the shiniest of them is the word sun. In German, it's Sonne, in Spanish, it's Sol, in Czech, it's Slunce, and in Sanskrit, it can be Surya. All S words. The moon is also a constant in skies across Europe and Asia, and the words for it are consistent across the Indo-European languages, although they fall into 2 groups. The M-sounding ones, like our moon, Swedish måne, and Lithuanian märnoa, are some examples, and the L-sounding ones, like French lune, Welsh chloia, and ancient Greek selene, although you have to rummage a bit to find it in there. Now, I don't know if you've ever tried to learn one of these European or Asian languages, but this idea that they're all related to English, I think, makes it a whole lot less daunting, because you know that there are patterns of similarity to be found. I highly recommend trying to learn another language, and I recommend starting your language learning journey with Babbel, who've kindly sponsored this video. Babbel is one of the top language learning apps in the world. Its intuitive lessons help you learn a language through real-life conversations.
Jag lär mig svenska.
I've been using it to learn Swedish, not just because all the Swedes I know are awesome and I want to impress them, but because it's a fun language with lots of surprising similarities to English. And now, jag pratar lite svenska. With Babbel, you can set yourself a goal and it will give you all the tools you need to meet it. Live teaching sessions, flashcards, podcasts, games, which I love, and of course, lessons you can do whenever and wherever you want.
Har du barn?
Har du barn?
Ett barnbarn.
Did you know that in Swedish, grandchild is just child? I found I can make fast progress with Babbel because you're very quickly learning sentences that you can actually use. It teaches real-world conversations. So click the link in the description of this video or scan the QR code to get 60% off on your subscription. There is a 20-day money-back guarantee, by the way, so just give it a go. Tack. Now, the sun and moon comparisons that we just did show a couple of the easier-to-spot relationships between words in different Indo-European languages. But over the last couple of centuries, linguists have found many, many more of them that are less obvious because pronunciations change. Take all of these different words for 100 across the Indo-European languages. 100. Kentum, yes, it's kentum, not centum. Hecaton, sto, and shatam. These do not appear to have very much in common with one another, but linguists believe they are all related, and that, for example, the h, k, s, and sh sound at the start of them all started off as the same sound. They believe that all of these words can therefore be traced back to a single source, the Proto-Indo-European kmtom. That star at the start, by the way, is important to mention. It's used by linguists to flag that this word has never been seen written down. It is not attested. And that is the case for all Proto-Indo-European terms, because it is a reconstructed language. It's our best guess at what a common ancestral language could have been like. And linguists remind you of that fact every time you see a PIE term by sticking that asterisk at the start. Anyway, it's quite easy to reverse engineer that kumtom into all of those words for 100. If you swap that nasal for an equally nasal kumtom becomes kuntom, which is extremely close to Latin centum, particularly if you take for granted that vowel sounds shift pretty easily over time. Likewise, if you accept that at some point one group of Indo-Europeans started pronouncing the k sound as sh, and then they might have also stopped bothering with that little nasal flourish in the middle, you get from kumtom to Sanskrit shatam. What about our word 100 then? Well, suppose that another group of Indo-Europeans started to pronounce that k as a h, not a stretch. Those two sounds often switch around between languages. And we've also discussed how the could turn into a n, plus we've also talked about the linguistic similarity between t and d. Drop the because humans do tend towards the lazy, and you get hund. And do you know what the Old English word for 100 was? Hund. Tell me that isn't satisfying. And what we've just done there is the perfect inverse of what linguists have done to try to reconstruct Proto-Indo-European. They've looked for patterns of sound change between languages among words with similar meanings, then recreated what they think would have been the common original sound. So a lot of the sound variations we saw with the words for 100 are also present in different words for heart. Look at how between all of these we again see that same pattern of h, k and s sounds at the start, as well as that switching around of T's and D's in the middle or at the end. So historical linguists looked at all of those words together and concluded that the common denominator, the common ancestor in Proto-Indo-European must have been something along the lines of cord or curd. Through the same process, they hypothesized the Proto-Indo-European for father, from which Latin pater is also descended, as well as Irish aher and Old Persian pita, and many, many others. They worked out the PIE for mother too, and for brother, and for head, and for foot, and for mouse, and for goose, and for many, many, many more. But as well as pronunciations changing over time, meanings of words change over time too. So you find that words that no longer mean the same thing across the Indo-European languages share a single Proto-Indo-European root. Take, for example, this term from PIE, wade. It is the theorized origin of the English word wit, meaning intelligence. But it is also the origin of Latin videre, meaning to see, a Sanskrit word meaning found, and the Lithuanian for face. So how can that be? Well, it isn't actually that much of a stretch to link the concepts of seeing and knowing. In English, to see something can mean to understand it, right? You see? And in a lot of languages, the word for face essentially means thing you see, like the French visage and German Gesicht. In fact, the word face just means the thing that is facing whoever is looking at it. So you see how meaning changes over a few millennia make these relationships harder to spot, but they are still there. Here's another example that I like. In Proto-Indo-European, this means sharp, but it's thought to be the origin of the English word edge, the Latin word for sour, and the Albanian for blade. However, you can see how the concept of sharpness links all of these words. By the way, the same PIE root also gives us the words acute, eager, a sharp keenness, and vinegar, which is from the French for sour wine. Actually, this is where the fun with Proto-Indo-European really kicks in for a dork like me, finding the words in English that are unexpectedly related to one another because they share a PIE origin. For example, did you know that the words hound and cynic are related? They can both be traced back to the Proto-Indo-European quan, meaning dog. Quan passed through a Germanic filter and arrived in English as hound, with its meaning almost unchanged, but quan also turned into the ancient Greek for dog, kuon. The Greeks then used that word to rather unkindly describe followers of a specific branch of philosophy. They called them kynikos, meaning dog-like, and then that term passed through Latin and then French and into English as cynic. Cool, right? Now that's a pairing where the two meanings are very different, but there are a shed load where you can kind of see how the concepts are linked. For example, head has the same Proto-Indo-European root as the word chief, the PIE caput. Along the Germanic branch, it became llavod in Old English, which became head in modern English. And along the Italic branch, it became caput in Latin, chef in French, and chief in English. The same root also gives us chapter, capital, captain, cape, and cap too. Another to get our teeth into is the pairing of tooth and dental. We know that the words obviously have related meanings, but I don't think it's obvious that they actually share the same root. Excuse the pun. They both originate in this PIE term. Pedal and foot share a Proto-Indo-European ancestor as well, as do the words tongue and language. So speaking of both, how would the Indo-Europeans, those early folk probably living somewhere around the Black Sea at the nexus of Europe and Asia, how would they have got their tongue around this extraordinary language? What did Proto-Indo-European sound like? Well, no one alive has ever heard Proto-Indo-European being spoken by a native speaker. Indeed, even based on the most conservative estimates, no one born within the last 4,500 years could have heard it either. However, plenty of people have attempted to represent what it could have sounded like, and you'll find lots of examples of people doing it here on YouTube. Check out this excellent one from the Quellant YouTube channel. An impressive vocal performance, if nothing else. It sounds like a sort of cross between Spanish and Swedish or something. It sounds surprisingly modern, doesn't it? And why shouldn't it, right? The human brain hasn't changed and our mouths work the same. We would have still had the capacity to speak a complex language back then. So that is Proto-Indo-European, our best attempt at reconstructing our original language. But hold on. Is it possible to go back any further? Well, some linguists say yes. There is a proposed even older ancestor, a hypothetical language that was somehow shared not just by all of the Indo-European languages, but by the Afro-Asiatic languages, the Dravidian languages, the Altaic, the Uralic, and the Kartvelian. This notional superfamily has been named the Nostratic family, a name that comes from the Latin for compatriots or fellow countrymen, or just us. What the linguists who believe in this theory have done is compare words from all the different hypothesized prehistoric languages, the proto-languages like Proto-Indo-European, and they've looked for patterns and found them. For example, they found correspondences between certain sounds in PIE and in Proto-Kartvelian. And they found similarities between specific terms in Proto-Indo-European and Proto-Uralic. Look at how similar the PIE for water is to the Proto-Uralic equivalent, and ditto for the two languages' words for name. They looked for these pairings within universal concepts because water is everywhere and, we've all got names no matter where we are. But not only did they find patterns within pairs of proto-languages, they also looked for things that were common to all, or at least many of those ancient languages. And they came across some. One apparent pattern is the common use of words to refer to oneself. In English, we have me, right? And lots of other Indo-European languages have first-person pronouns beginning with sounds. But so also do the Kartvelian, Afro-Asiatic, Uralic, and Altaic proto-languages.
Nostraticists also point to the similarities between the Proto-Indo-European, Uralic, and Altaic words for hand.
The problem is, not all of the hypothesized members of the Nostratic superfamily fit that pattern. For the theory to work, you have to pick and choose the ones that do, which is something that makes the whole notion controversial. Another major reason why the Nostratic scenario is seen as a bit wobbly is it involves reconstructing a language based on other reconstructions, some of which were already based on reconstructions themselves. Nostratic, of which there is no written proof, is partially based on Proto-Indo-European, of which there is no written proof, which is partially based on Proto-Germanic, of which there is no written proof. However, there are some very dedicated linguists doing their best to identify the pitfalls in that theory and fix them. So watch this linguistic space, I guess. But if the Nostratic theory doesn't cover every language in the world, could there therefore be more of these super languages? And if so, could they have a notional common ancestor themselves? Well, believe it or not, there are people who have hypothesized this very thing and called it proto-human or proto-world. But it requires a rather large leap of the imagination, and the fact is we will never know if it existed, because if it was spoken, it was being spoken tens of thousands of years before humans wrote anything down. However, I have done my best in this video to explain the very earliest origins of English. If you have enjoyed it, I think you'll like this video too. And I also think you'll enjoy my wordy, nerdy podcast, Words Unravelled, which you can watch here or just download wherever you get your podcasts. I'll catch you in whatever you choose to watch or listen to next. Cheerio.